So we try to develop this kind of relationship with the big tech investors and to attract investment in France, in Paris, and especially in the R&D side, because one of the strengths of France is besides its ability to to design policy and maybe sometimes too much regulation policy, but but besides this regulation side, we have a big asset in France, which are the people, the scientists. We have a lot of engineering schools that are recognized worldwide and very, very good at mathematics.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to and watching The Chief AI Officer. Today I'm speaking with Nicolas Gaudemet, who is Chief AI Officer at onepoint. Nicolas, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, you're joining from Paris, which, as we said right before we started recording, is where I'm from, even though I don't sound it. So I know it's a turbulent time over there, but I'm glad, I'm glad we're having this conversation. Before we get too deep into things that are going on at onepoint and how you're operationalizing AI, can you just share a bit more on your journey and kind of the evolution of your career all the way up to your role as Chief AI Officer at onepoint?
My background is that I'm an engineer. I studied in an engineering school, which is Polytechnic, and actually there are lots of alumni of Polytechnic who works in the biggest AI companies in the world, at DeepMind or Meta AI, or in big French startups like Mistral AI or H, which is a new startup who just got a new funds last month in Paris, or Giscard also, which are famous French startups at the French Tech. So I studied engineering and obviously mathematics and computer science there. And then I started my career in, really in the business, working in different companies like Orange, which is one of the leading European telecom operator, and also at Fnac Darty, one of the leading retailer. So a lot of business acumen, especially on the commerce sales and managing P&L. And then a few years ago, it was I think in 2017, this model from DeepMind called AlphaGo, who won against the first player of Go worldwide, which was a Korean player, and AlphaGo won. And I was really disturbed by this, especially because I love Asia. So actually, I spent a few time in Korea. I wanted to study AI again, and I took new classes where I use everything I learned at Polytechnic in computer science and mathematics, algebra, and so on. And so I took the classes of Andrew Ng and also some classes from Geoffrey Hilton, and you can follow classes from anywhere in any university now online. So it's really huge to be able to do so. So I studied AI a lot back in 2017, and then I was called by the former Secretary of State for Digital Affairs in France, and I became his chief of staff, where we were in charge of running the digital policy for France, and we worked a lot on AI. We had a plan called AI for Humanity, with R&D centers, with attracting foreign companies like Meta or DeepMind to open centers, R&D centers in France. We work with public services and administrations to include AI in the services they developed. We try to help companies as well. So it was very, very interesting. And then I joined onepoint, where I worked a lot on data and AI issues. So onepoint is one of the leader in consulting and technology in France. And we work on all technology topics. And I specialize myself in data and AI, of course. Beginning of last year, I was appointed Chief AI Officer because, this was the tremendous acceleration of AI with generative AI and ChatGPT. So that's when I was appointed at my current position at one point.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. I think obviously a background in engineering mathematics, but like you're not the first person on the show to mention AlphaGo as a pivotal moment for them personally in their career as well. So I see that that brought you back to the topic, and very interesting as well that you've spent so much time working on the policy side of things, right? Because France has done a lot of work to try to attract AI investments to kind of enable the startup environment there. Can you talk a bit more about that? Actually, what were some of the initiatives that you drove, or what was, what did you see as key to bringing AI innovation in France?
Well, for instance, we work on the French Tech Passport, which is a specific policy to attract, I mean, to ease the formalities, the administrative formalities for foreign people, high-skilled worker, engineers, for instance, who would like to work in France. And so we try to ease all the administrative paperwork they had to do so that it's easier for them to settle in Paris. So I think that was one of the reasons we have now, for instance, Poolside. It's a
Hmm.
French startup in Paris, but it was founded by an American person from GitHub, so I think this is quite attractive and a great success. We also had Choose France, the big event with President Macron to attract the top investors from all the world, and including Meta with Mark Zuckerberg and Google and so on. So we try to develop this kind of relationship with the big tech investors and to attract investment in France, in Paris, and especially in the R&D side, because one of the strengths of France is besides its ability to design policy and maybe sometimes too much regulation policy, but but besides this regulation side, we have a big asset in France, which are the people, the scientists. We have a lot of engineering schools that are recognized worldwide and very, very good at mathematics. And it's very useful, obviously, to know how to use mathematics when you want to do AI at a good level. So I think that is why also we work a lot on investing on our R&D laboratories, and to make sure that there were bridges between the public laboratories, public labs, and the companies and the startups, to make sure that all the competencies we had in the labs could translate into economical and businesses with the startups and the big groups.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure that was very interesting work because, as you said, France's labor laws are not always the most flexible, but there is an enormous wealth of knowledge to draw on in the Les Écoles Polytechniques and the engineering schools. I have cousins that have been there as well. You yourself have been there. And another thing on those labs, right? I know that it's always tricky to keep that door open between innovation labs and the private sector, and how do you spin out companies and make sure IP is protected, the university is involved. It's a delicate balance that I'm sure you were trying to strike in the policy world. Another thing that you've done is also write fiction. You write regularly in a periodical. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it speaks to the fact that you have the technical side, you have the business side, but you also have the other side of AI, and your interest probably goes beyond just those two
yeah,
domains.
I wrote a novel which is called La fin des idoles, or The End of the Idols, a few years ago, who won a prize, the first novel prize of Jules Renard, which is a famous French writer. And actually, it's interesting because in La fin des idoles, I explore. It's like an anticipation novel set in 2020 something. And actually, I explored neuroscience and connecting brains. And actually, it's funny to see now that people like Elon Musk invest in Neurobrain and these kind of companies. It's exactly what I wrote about a few years ago in my book. And actually, it came out it was published in 2018. And now we live what I described in the book. So it's a bit. And right now I'm writing in a periodical. It's a review, cultural and technical review called Flash with 2A in French, obviously. And I write a chronicle each quarter, which is called Dark Zone, Zone d'ombre. And I write a fiction part, very short, a few pages, about AI and the impact of AI. And actually, it's weird because, again, I wrote a few months ago about the impact of AI and environment. To make it dramatic, I decided to set it up in a plane. So it's some kind of chief AI officer traveling in a plane to go to some COP. It's COP something into 2040. You know, the COP for dealing with the environment. I don't remember the name in English, but you know, the big environmental gathering of all the governments and so on for a while. So there is this COP set in China, and this chief AI officer, she's a woman. She's experienced, and she travels to this COP in a plane. And actually, the plane has a lot of turbulence. You know, when the wind is too hard, and people get hurt in the plane. I won't tell the end of the short story, but it's weird to read now in the papers that a lot of people get hurt in the plane because of turbulence because of the climate change. And actually, digital and AI have a lot to do with climate change on both sides. You know, it can help to reduce emissions, carbon emissions, and so on specific use cases, but also the data centers, they consume a lot of electricity, a lot of water, and have a negative impact. So it's a very, very, very important, very, very big issue about AI.
Yeah, it's always, I think you're not the first science fiction writer to find out that what you write has become reality probably quicker than you imagine. It is a strange world like that.
I think it's a bit scary.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the environmental impact of AI, and you write a lot about AI in society and the ethics of it. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges we're facing?
Society-wise, the biggest challenge for me is the impact of generative AI on democracies, the impact of generative AI on fake news, deepfakes, and also the impact of AI on recommender systems, on social networks, because it doesn't really matter if you have a lot of crap content and fake news if nobody sees it. But the problem is that those news will look more and more real because when you generate it with powerful generative AI engines like GPT-4o or Sora, for instance, to talk about the OpenAI models, it will be easier for people with chaos agendas to develop this kind of content. And the problem is that this kind of content can be recommended by recommender systems of social networks because it will create more engagement and more, you know, negative surprise and anxiety and fear and anger. And those emotions are the criteria to generate engagement and are, you know, optimized by recommended systems because it is the business model of the social networks. So it's really scary. And of course, we try to regulate this. We have this DSA regulation in Europe who tries to control this, but you know, it's a bit scary. And I think that what we observed in all the Western democracies, in the States, in France, in Britain, in Western Europe, we observe everywhere that extremism goes up. And I think this has to do also with the power of the social networks and the recommender system, AI recommender systems behind it, and could be even get worse. It could even get worse with generative AI. So I think this is one of the biggest threats we will face in the near term. And actually, I think it was noticed by Davos, who also wrote in its report on global risks that the biggest risk for this year was the deep fakes made by generative AI.
Completely agree with most of the things you just said. In a world where people struggle to understand what's real and are having more extreme views, generative AI is going to put fuel on the fire. And recommendation systems, as you said as well, they're the way that they're designed, it also creates echo chambers, right? Like they feed on that engagement, but they also push people more and more into their different silos because of the very nature of how they're designed. And so I think it's going to be a very big challenge for society as we figure out how to deal with that. Taking a shift towards the work that you're doing at OnePoint and some of the practical applications of AI, because you're doing a lot of things there. I know you have a Neo assistant built on, I think, Azure and OpenAI technologies that you've rolled out internally, but also to some customers. You're involved in a lot of digital transformation work, right? What are some of the big successes that you've observed?
Well, in France, companies, of course, they take AI quite seriously, especially generative AI, because they feel that it's a really a game changer. Some of them go faster than others who are quite slow. I mean, it depends on your sector, on the culture of the company, the employee resistance on change, and so on. So, there's I like to talk about this stair. You start with some kind of acculturation training to just to understand what it's all about. We did it a lot last year with a lot of companies, executive committee seminars and strategic gathering to just to explain and to experiment with some basic AI tools. So this is the first step of the stair. Then you have the step of experimenting and defining the prioritizing your use cases according to their value, their technical feasibility, their cultural feasibility in the context of your company, and the risk associated to it. It could be either the risk of doing it or the risk of not doing it as well. So this gives you some criteria to prioritize use cases. And then you can experiment some of the use cases with either off-the-shelf tools, like 365 Copilot or Gemini, or any tool that you can have on the market, like ChatGPT Enterprise or Runway, for instance. Or you can design and prototype and design your own AI system. So we help companies to choose between market tools or their own tools. If you have a market tool, it's easier, but it can be more expensive, and it won't help the companies to build a barrier to entry and to differentiate from competitions. But we help them to to decide between these two paths and to experiment and to measure the impact on productivity and so on. And then it helps them to design a transformation plan, a strategic plan, and then the big issue arrives. So most of the companies are at this stage right now. And the next step is the industrialization, the scaling in the whole company. And the scaling has two dimensions. There is a dimension on a technical dimension, because when you have an AI system, you need to be able to integrate it in your whole information system, where you have a lot of legacy systems, you have a lot of security rules that can make difficult things to integrate. So this in technical scaling is one of the dimension, and the other dimension is the human scaling, meaning that you can have the best tool in the world if you don't have a change management plan with adoption, with trainings, with ambassadors, with webinars to try and test and show and to explain and to make sure that people don't fear the tools and understand how they can help them in their daily task, and it won't replace them and so on. So this change part, the human dimensions is key. And this is the step where most of the company are not yet, and we help them to get there. And once they get there, they can really think of becoming, of managing more and more use cases with value, and enter again this whole cycle of prototyping and then industrializing, with the technical dimension, the change dimension, and so on, and with new use cases and so on. So it's like a circle of change that we try to help them to implement through what we call AI factories. We propose to companies, and we deploy in some companies. In the meantime, it helps the company to really to have a whole transformation plan, because when you have those tools and change and so on, you can really think about how you redesign your processes, you redesign your organizations, your organograms, redesign the way that your managers manage their teams, because everything will change with AI. Redesign the way you talk to your consumers and your employees. So it's a whole transformation plan that will help the companies to reap the fruits of the AI transformations. And that's why we try companies to do. But most of them are still experimenting a lot, prototyping a lot. We have some success in deploying, for instance, productivity tools like our new assistant in some big financial institutions, some big entertainment companies, some big companies in the sector immobilier.
The real estate.
Yeah, real estate,
Yeah.
for instance, the industry. So we have a lot of success in deploying it, but most of the companies are not yet at this stage of deploying and industrializing. So I think there is a lot of value to get. And it's interesting because we measure a lot of potential productivity gains in terms of time spent by employees in any population. What we have measured on, for instance, developers or designers, completely different populations, or marketers, or strategy consultants, any kind of population. With a good tool, they can gain 10 to 15% of productivity now, and in a few years it will be like 30% of productivity. So it means, some task of your day, you will spend much less time on some task. For instance, if you have to do some reports, it will be, you will gain maybe 90% of the time you would have spent without AI tools, and now you will spend only 10% of this. Some of your tasks won't be reduced at all. For instance, if you have a meeting, you will still have meetings in the future. So if you take every task of the day, the mean that we observe is around 10 to 15%. And what is interesting is that it's the same kind of percentage for different persona, different populations in the company. But if you want, as a company, to reach these productivity levels and to transform them into value, you need to redesign your processes, you need to change your organizations, you need to change the way you work, and you need to make sure that people adapt the tools. So you need to change management plan and so on. You need to make sure that the tools scale in your company. So it's not that easy to get this potential productivity gains, and that's what we try to help our client to do.
Yeah, I love that framework in terms of the stairs of AI, right? Because you had educate as the first step in that, then really identify and prioritize the use cases. 3, experiment and measure, and 4 is where you get into scaling industrially across the entire company. And with that, I like that you highlight that there is the technical side of scaling and the human side of scaling, because they are very, very different challenges. And as you rightly point out, the change management process with AI, I think, is going to be very, very big part of the challenge that we have as organizations. And it's something that multiple people on this show have also mentioned. As people and companies adopt this so broadly, generative AI in particular, obviously there's many different types of AI, but what are some of the ethical considerations and kind of bias issues associated with that? Where are the biggest challenges, do you think?
there are a lot of issues that are, I mean, you mentioned ethical issues, but you have also environmental issues. Actually, we developed a scorecard at one point, which is called Reset. So Reset means responsabilité éthique, sociétale, économique et technologique. So ethical, societal, economic and technology responsibility. And we try to measure the impact of any project on all these dimensions. So for instance, on the environmental issues, we have our new assistants that equip all our team since 1 year now, and a lot of people at our customers. We try to integrate environmental issue in the usage of our new assistants. For instance, we make sure that we have some frugality in the model we choose. So for instance, if we have a client who is on AWS, we will use obviously the models available at AWS. So it will be mostly the cloud suite from Anthropic, but you don't need Anthropic Sonnet 3.5 or any use case, and you can use only IQ or smaller models for specific use case. So we try to have a frugality in the model we choose, because we see a tendency of clients to prefer the latest model for everything, and the user prefer to have the latest model for everything, but it's not useful always. And you don't really need it, but what is sure is that it consumes a lot of more of energy, and actually it costs more as well. So we have to have this frugality approach. We try also to choose instances of machines, of models in geographies where the electricity is less carbonated. So for instance, if you use ChatGPT Enterprise, all the servers of OpenAI, they run in the States, and in the States, the electricity has a carbon rate which is not that good. In France, it's much better because we have all the nuclear plants producing electricity. So the carbon rate in France is very, very good. And sometimes, for instance, when we want to use GPT-4o, it's not available in France yet. So we make sure that we choose a geography that is not far from France, because you have the transport, the network latency issue. But also we try to use to find a geography where the electricity is not. I don't have a high rate of carbon, and for instance, GPT-4o, it is in Sweden and in other geographies, and we prefer Sweden precisely because of this, because in Sweden you have a lot of renewable energy and the impact of environment is less. It's also one of the reasons why we prefer dark theme as a default theme on Neo, because when you use a dark theme on your phone, if you add a dark theme whole day long, your battery will last twice, because the pixels are almost dark and don't consume electricity. So that is one of the way we try to make sure we don't have negative impact on the environment. In terms of economic impact, we try to have a ripple effect in the French ecosystem. So we work a lot with French startups to make sure that the investment we make and the recommendations we make to our clients have an impact on the French ecosystem, and not only always on the big powers like the oligopoly of Google and Microsoft and so on. Even though we love Microsoft and Google, we work a lot with them, but we also try to work with the French ecosystem when it's relevant. So this is for the economic responsibility. On the technological side, we try to develop some kind of technological sovereignty or autonomy. So we try to be not dependent. For instance, you mentioned that Neo was built on Azure and OpenAI, but actually it's not really the case, because Neo was thought from the start as a platform we could deploy on Azure and with OpenAI, of course, but also on AWS with Anthropic, or on Google with Gemini, or with on OVH in France with Mistral AI, for instance. So we try to have design tools that work with any infrastructure, and that's how we get some kind of autonomy and technological autonomy. On the social parts and the biases, for instance, or the truth, because when you ask a question to your model, it can hallucinate and it can generate fake news. So, for instance, we develop metrics to measure the effectiveness, the efficiency of our retrieval augmented generation systems, RAGs. And we measure different metrics, such as the answer relevancy to the question, the context relevancy to the questions, the answer fidelity to the retrieved contexts, and the rightfulness of the answer compared to the ground truth. And we try to measure this to make sure that the RAG just tell the truth, and where they don't know, they say they don't know, you know. So this is one of the way we try to take into account this reset scorecard.
I love that scorecard because you're thinking several steps ahead of terms of, you know, environmental, economic, like technical sovereignty, and then socially. It's such a clear framework to think about that. And as these systems scale throughout enterprises, just as one example, the environmental costs can become very real, right? And every large company has environmental, social responsibility goals. They have corporate social responsibility goals. There are a number of things that they'll need to think about very carefully and implement the right governance frameworks as they scale this. So those are very helpful things, I think, for some of our audience to hear. This role, the chief AI officer role, is going to become more and more important, I think, in the enterprise. Many people aspire to a role like the one you're in today. What advice would you give those people?
It's a very complete role because my job is a business job because I'm in charge of the AI business. So, you know, I need to make sure we have a good revenue on AI and to develop it and grow it and make sure our clients are happy with what we develop for them in AI. It's also a role that is turned to the internal transformation because I'm in charge also of the transformation of onepoint with AI. And actually, we like to say that we walk the talk, that everything we sell to our customer, we somehow experience it and scale it at onepoint first. That's what we did, for instance, with our new assistant. I'm in charge of R&D as well, and partnerships and media outreach and spokesperson. So this chief AI officer role is very complete. And my first advice, if you want to reach such a role, is to try to develop both your business acumen and your technical AI skills, because my day are really, I spend a few hours on coding and developing on Neo, for instance, with my tech team, and I spend the other hours speaking to clients, some CEO or some chief marketing officer or some chief strategy officer or chief data officer and so on, and selling projects and delivering projects for those kind of executive in companies. And obviously it's really business. You need to talk the business to them and what will be the impact on their ARE and their revenues and their growth and their equity story if they're a startup or a private company or an investment fund and so on. So you need really to work both your business acumen, financial acumen, marketing acumen, and your technical skills. I think it's very, very important. But the most important, I would say, and I think it's not only for AI officers, but I think it's for everybody working in the company, because, you know, everyone now will be enhanced, will be augmented with AI. And one of the big fear is that the young people won't learn anymore because it's so easy to have this ChatGPT answering to everything, and you don't have, you know, this is an old debate, very, very old, actually, because if you take Socrates, for instance, Socrates was very, very afraid and upset about an ancient technology, which was very new at that time, which was just writing. You know, writing was a huge technology, a huge innovation at its time, because it was a way to externalize your memory on a physical recorder somehow. And Socrates was quite afraid of it, and that's why he never wrote anything. Everything was written by Plato. And Socrates said in a famous Plato writing called Phèdre, le discours de Phèdre, said with writing, if you write, you won't use people won't use their memory anymore. They won't exercise their brain, and somehow they will become dumb. And that's exactly the debate about AI today. Will people become dumb or not with AI? And so my advice is, if you really take advantage of this new super powerful tool and be really augmented, it's possible you won't become dumb, but you have to keep a very critical mind, and you have to be very demanding concerning or regarding yourself, what you produce, what you do, and very demanding regarding the AI outputs of the tool you use. And this is really the condition for you to learn and to still learn. And I think you can learn a lot with AI and learn really faster and produce really huge things. For instance, with Neo and generative AI in code, I code twice or three times faster. And I learn a lot of different languages I never used before, and it's really, really interesting. But I'm able to do so because I don't take for granted what AI says, and I always check everything, and I want more. So you need to want more, and you need to be very critical and skeptical about what comes out of it, because if you don't do so, you won't learn as much as you could learn.
Yeah, I love that, putting it in historical context, going as far back as Socrates. These are always the big questions we have with technology. Every generation feels the same way. And I love that you end on keeping, demanding things from the outputs and keeping a hypercritical eye, because we're entering a world where if people over rely on it and they don't maintain a critical eye, the hallucinations, the problems with LLMs in particular are going to be dramatic. And so we need to demand that of ourselves as we forge our relationship with this technology. And I think it's going to be a very interesting evolution of that relationship over the next few years. Nicolas, I could talk about this stuff for hours, to be honest, but that's all we have time for today. If people want to follow your work and what you do, where should they go?
Well, the easier is to follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post the most. I have an Instagram account as well, but LinkedIn is good.
Okay, so that's Nicolas Gaudemet from onepoint. Go follow him on LinkedIn. Send him a message if you listened to the episode and enjoyed it. Nicolas, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Ben. It was really exciting to talk to you.